In the bustling heart of Manhattan, tucked away on a quiet street corner, stood a small cafe that smelled of freshly brewed coffee and buttery croissants. It wasn't fancy, but it had charm, a place where people came to escape the noise of the city for just a little while. On this particular morning, an elderly woman walked in, her presence commanding yet gentle. She wore a tailored coat, designer sunglasses perched neatly on her head, and carried herself with the kind of grace only years of experience could bring. Her name was Eleanor Whitmore, though most people knew her as one of New York's wealthiest philanthropists. At 82, she had seen more than her fair share of life, successes, failures, joys, and heartbreaks. But despite all the money, properties, and accolades, there was something missing from her life: closure. For decades, she had been haunted by the memory of her daughter, Victoria, who had vanished without a trace after a bitter argument. That rift between them had never healed, and now all Eleanor had left of her daughter was a single locket engraved with the initials VW. The pendant had disappeared along with Victoria, leaving Eleanor with nothing but regret. That day, Eleanor had decided to take a break from her usual routine. Her chauffeur dropped her off outside the cafe, insisting she needed some time away from the penthouse. Sitting at a corner table by the window, she ordered a cup of Earl Grey tea and let her thoughts drift. As she sipped slowly, watching the world go by through the glass pane, a young waitress approached to refill her cup. There was something about the girl, perhaps the way she moved quietly, almost unnoticed, or maybe the softness in her voice when she asked if everything was okay. But then, something else caught Eleanor's eye. Around the waitress's neck hung a delicate gold chain, and dangling from it was a pendant. It was small, barely noticeable unless you were looking closely, but Eleanor couldn't look away. Her breath hitched. The design, it was unmistakable. An intricate floral pattern surrounded by tiny diamonds with 2 letters engraved in elegant script. VW. Her heart began to race. This couldn't be possible. How could this young woman be wearing her daughter's locket? Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. Clearing her throat, she said, "Excuse me, miss. May I ask where you got that necklace?" The waitress paused mid-pour, startled by the question. She glanced down at the pendant, then back up at Eleanor. For a moment, she seemed unsure how to respond. Finally, she replied softly, "Oh, this? My mom gave it to me. She said she found it years ago when she worked as a housekeeper somewhere in the city." Eleanor's mind whirled. A housekeeper? Could it really be the same locket? She studied the young woman carefully. She looked to be in her early 20s with kind eyes and a shy smile. Her uniform was simple, her hair tied back in a neat ponytail. There was no sign of wealth or privilege, just an ordinary girl trying to make ends meet. And yet, do you know anything else about it? Eleanor pressed gently, careful not to sound too eager. Did your mother ever mention where exactly she found it? The waitress shook her head. Not really. All I know is that she kept it for years before giving it to me. She always told me it was special, but she never explained why. After she passed away, I found a note with it. It said, "One day you'll find where you belong." Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. Those words, they struck a chord deep within her. Could this girl somehow be connected to Victoria? Was this fate stepping in after all these years? She wanted to ask more, to demand answers right then and there, but she stopped herself. Instead, she smiled warmly and thanked the waitress, slipping her card onto the tray as the girl turned to leave. "I hope we can talk again soon," Eleanor said softly. "There's something important I'd like to discuss." As the waitress nodded and walked away, Eleanor sat back in her chair, her mind racing. What were the chances? Could this young woman hold the key to unlocking the mystery of her daughter's disappearance? One thing was certain: Eleanor wasn't going to let this lead slip through her fingers. Whatever it took, she would find out the truth. Eleanor left the cafe that day with her mind buzzing. She couldn't shake the image of the pendant or the young waitress who wore it. It was like a puzzle piece she had been searching for her entire life, one she didn't even realize was missing, until now. Back in her penthouse, surrounded by marble floors and priceless art, Eleanor felt more restless than ever. The locket wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything she had lost: her daughter Victoria, and the chance to make things right. For hours, Eleanor sat at her desk, flipping through old photo albums and letters. She traced, her fingers over faded pictures of Victoria as a child. Her bright smile, her unruly curls, the way she used to laugh so freely. There were also snapshots from Victoria's teenage years, when their relationship began to strain under the weight of expectations and misunderstandings. Eleanor remembered those arguments vividly: the sharp words, the slammed doors, the silence that followed. And then, one day, Victoria was gone. Just like that. No note, no explanation, nothing but an empty room and a broken heart. But now, decades later, here was this girl, a stranger wearing Victoria's locket. Could it really be a coincidence, or was there something deeper at play? Eleanor knew she needed answers, but she couldn't simply barge into the waitress's life and demand them. She had to approach this carefully, thoughtfully. After all, if this young woman truly was connected to Victoria, she deserved respect, not intrusion. The next morning, Eleanor called her trusted private investigator, a man named George whom she had worked with for years. He was discreet, efficient, and completely loyal. When he arrived at her penthouse, Eleanor handed him a photograph of the locket she had taken on her phone. "I need you to find out everything you can about this girl," she said firmly. "Her name, her background, her family history. Anything that might connect her to my daughter." George nodded, sensing the urgency in her voice. "Consider it done," he replied before leaving to begin his work. While waiting for George's report, Eleanor decided to take matters into her own hands. Disguising herself as a journalist researching local stories, she returned to the cafe the following afternoon. This time she chose a different table closer to the counter where the waitress worked. As she sipped her tea, she observed the young woman closely. She noticed how hard she worked, balancing trays with ease, greeting customers warmly despite the long hours. There was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that reminded Eleanor of Victoria. When the waitress finally approached her table, Eleanor struck up a conversation. "Hi again," she said with a friendly smile. "I don't think I introduced myself last time. My name's Eleanor, and I'm writing an article about everyday heroes in our community. People who work tirelessly behind the scenes to keep things running smoothly. You seem like exactly the kind of person I'd love to feature." The waitress looked surprised but pleased. "Really? Me?" she asked, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not sure I'm that interesting." "Oh, I disagree," Eleanor replied warmly. "Everyone has a story worth telling. Why don't you join me for a moment? Tell me about yourself." Hesitant at first, the waitress eventually sat down across from Eleanor. Over the next hour, she opened up about her life. She spoke about growing up in a small apartment with her mother, who worked multiple jobs to provide for them. She talked about losing her mom a few years ago and how difficult it had been to navigate life without her guidance. She mentioned the locket again, explaining how much it meant to her, though she still didn't know its origins. Eleanor listened intently, her heart aching with every word. This girl, this kind, humble soul, was carrying a piece of her family's history around her neck, completely unaware of its significance. By the end of their conversation, Eleanor was certain of one thing: she needed proof. She couldn't act on assumptions alone. A few days later, George returned with his findings. He confirmed that the waitress's mother had indeed worked as a housekeeper for several wealthy families in Manhattan during the late 80s and early 90s. More importantly, he uncovered records showing that she had briefly worked for Eleanor's household around the same time Victoria disappeared. It was a startling revelation, but it still wasn't enough to prove a direct connection. Determined to get definitive answers, Eleanor devised a plan. Through George, she arranged for DNA testing under the guise of a health study. They offered free screenings to employees at the cafe, framing it as a wellness initiative. The waitress agreed without hesitation, unaware of the true purpose behind the test. Weeks passed, and Eleanor waited anxiously for the results. Each day felt longer than the last, her mind consumed with possibilities. What if the tests came back negative? What if this was all just a cruel twist of fate? But deep down, she couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut, that this girl was somehow tied to her past, to Victoria. Finally, the day arrived. George called her early in the morning, his voice steady but tinged with excitement. "You'll want to sit down for this," he said. Eleanor sank into her chair, bracing herself for whatever news awaited her. "The DNA confirms it," George announced. "She's your granddaughter." Eleanor let out a shaky breath, tears welling up in her eyes. All these years she had searched for answers, longing for closure. And now here it was, a living, breathing link to the daughter she had lost. But with this discovery came a flood of emotions: joy, guilt, fear, hope. How would the waitress react when she learned the truth? Would she welcome Eleanor into her life, or would she reject her entirely? One thing was clear: Eleanor's journey was far from over. Eleanor sat in her penthouse, staring out at the city skyline as the sun dipped below the horizon. The weight of George's words still hung heavy in the air. "She's your granddaughter." Those three simple words carried decades of unanswered questions, buried pain, and now, a fragile hope for reconciliation. But how do you tell someone their entire life might be built on secrets they never knew existed? How do you explain that the locket they've treasured for years is more than just a keepsake? It's a missing piece of a family puzzle. For days, Eleanor wrestled with what to do next. She replayed every interaction she'd had with the waitress, trying to gauge how the young woman might react. Would she feel betrayed, relieved, angry? Or would she simply walk away, unwilling to open a door that could change everything? Eleanor knew she couldn't rush this moment. It had to be handled delicately, with care and honesty. After all, this wasn't just about her, it was about the girl too. Finally, Eleanor decided on a plan. She would invite the waitress to dinner at her estate under the pretense of continuing their journalistic research. It wasn't entirely dishonest. Eleanor genuinely wanted to learn more about her. But this time, she wouldn't hide behind a fake identity or clever excuses. This time, she would tell the truth no matter how hard it was. The day of the dinner arrived, and Eleanor made sure everything was perfect. Her staff prepared a lavish meal, setting the long mahogany table with fine china and crystal glasses. Candles flickered softly, casting a warm glow across the room. Despite the opulence, Eleanor felt nervous, more nervous than she had in years. What if the waitress didn't believe her? Worse yet, what if she resented her for keeping such a monumental secret? When the doorbell rang, Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She smoothed her dress, took a deep breath, and walked to the entrance. There stood the waitress, looking slightly out of place in her modest sweater and jeans. She clutched a small bouquet of flowers, clearly unsure of what to expect. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said warmly, stepping aside to let her in. "And these are lovely." The waitress smiled shyly. "I wasn't sure what to bring, so I figured flowers were safe." "They're perfect," Eleanor assured her, motioning toward the dining area. "Please, make yourself comfortable. Dinner will be served shortly." As they ate, Eleanor steered the conversation toward lighter topics: the weather, the cafe, the waitress's hobbies. But beneath the surface, her mind raced. How could she broach the subject without overwhelming her guest? Eventually, she realized there was no easy way. She would have to dive in head first. Setting her fork down, Eleanor looked directly at the waitress. Her voice trembled slightly as she began to speak. "There's something I need to tell you. Something important. And I want you to know that I've struggled with how to say this because, well, it's not an easy thing to hear." The waitress froze, her fork hovering midair. "Okay," she said slowly, her brow furrowing with concern. "What is it?" Eleanor reached into her pocket and pulled out the photograph of the locket. "Do you remember this?" she asked gently. "The pendant you wear around your neck?" The waitress nodded, confused. "Yes, but I don't understand." Why does it matter so much to you? Eleanor hesitated, searching for the right words. Because it belonged to my daughter, she admitted, her voice cracking. My daughter, Victoria. She disappeared many years ago, and we lost touch before that. I've spent decades wondering what happened to her, hoping someday I'd find her again. But instead, she paused, tears welling up in her eyes. Instead, I found you. The room fell silent. The waitress stared at Eleanor, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it seemed like time itself had stopped. Then, finally, she spoke. Wait, what are you saying, that this locket belonged to your daughter and that somehow I'm connected to her? Eleanor nodded, wiping her tears with a trembling hand. Yes, we did some testing, a DNA test, and it confirmed it. You're her child. Which means, you're my granddaughter. The waitress blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what she'd just heard. She leaned back in her chair, visibly shaken. I don't know what to say, she stammered. This is insane. Are you sure? How can this even be real? I know it's a lot to take in, Eleanor said, softly. Believe me, I've been sitting with this information for days and it still feels surreal. But it's true. Your mother must have worked for my household during a very difficult time in our lives. Somehow she ended up with the locket and now here we are. The waitress shook her head, struggling to wrap her mind around the revelation. But why didn't anyone ever tell me? Why didn't my mom say anything? Eleanor sighed deeply. I wish I had answers for you. All I know is that my relationship with Victoria was complicated. We argued and she left home. I thought she hated me. I never imagined she'd start a new life, have a child, and keep it hidden from me. But maybe she wanted to protect you. Maybe she thought it was better this way. Tears began streaming down the waitress's face. So my whole life has been a lie? Everything I thought I knew? No, Eleanor interrupted firmly. Not a lie. Just incomplete. You're still you. Nothing changes that. But now you have a chance to fill in the gaps, to learn about where you came from. And if you'll allow me, I'd like to be part of that journey. The waitress looked at her, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions, confusion, anger, sadness, and perhaps just a glimmer of hope. I don't know what to do with all this, she admitted quietly. It's so much to process, but thank you for telling me. At least now I know. Eleanor reached across the table, placing a gentle hand over hers. Take all the time you need, she said. There's no rush. I just wanted you to know the truth. Whatever happens next, I'll respect your decision. For the first time that evening, the waitress managed a small, hesitant smile. Thank you, she whispered. I think I needed to hear that. As dessert was served, the atmosphere shifted ever so slightly. The tension eased, replaced by a fragile sense of connection. They talked more. About Victoria. About memories. About dreams for the future. Though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, both women felt a spark of possibility. For the first time in years, Eleanor allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, healing was within reach. The days following that life-altering dinner were a whirlwind of emotions for both Eleanor and the young waitress. For Eleanor, it was a mix of relief and anxiety. She had finally told the truth, but now the ball was in the waitress's court. Would she accept this newfound connection, or would she shut Eleanor out completely? Eleanor tried to remind herself that patience was key. After all, the girl, her granddaughter, had just been handed a bombshell that could upend everything she thought she knew about her life. For the waitress, things weren't any easier. Her mind was a storm of questions without clear answers. Who was her mother really? Why had she kept such a huge secret? And what did it mean to suddenly have a grandmother, a wealthy, powerful one at that, step into her life? It felt like stepping into a storybook, except this wasn't fiction. This was real, messy, complicated life. One moment, she wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all. The next, she found herself curious, even hopeful, about the possibility of learning more about her roots. Eleanor decided to give her space, knowing that pushing too hard might only drive her away. But she also couldn't sit idly by. So she sent a letter, a handwritten note on elegant stationery, inviting the waitress to visit her again whenever she felt ready. "There's so much I want to share with you," Eleanor wrote. "But only when you're comfortable. Please know that my door is always open." It took nearly 2 weeks for the waitress to respond. When she finally called, her voice was hesitant but tinged with curiosity. "I'd like to come back," she said softly, "but not for dinner this time. Maybe we could just talk about my mom." Eleanor's heart swelled with gratitude. "Of course," she replied warmly. "We'll take it slow, whatever you need." When the waitress arrived at the penthouse again, Eleanor greeted her with a gentle hug. A small gesture, but one that carried immense meaning. They settled into the living room, surrounded by shelves lined with books and framed photographs. Eleanor pulled out an old album, its leather cover worn from years of use. "This is Victoria," she said, pointing to a picture of a smiling young woman with wild curls and sparkling eyes. "Your mother." The waitress stared at the photo, her breath catching in her throat. It was surreal to see her mother as someone other than the person she remembered, the tired but loving single parent who worked tirelessly to provide for them. In this picture, Victoria looked carefree, full of dreams and possibilities. "She looked so happy," the waitress murmured. Eleanor said wistfully, "at least until things got complicated. We fought a lot toward the end. I wanted her to follow a certain path, one I thought would bring her stability and success. But she wanted something different, something freer." Eleanor paused, her voice thick with regret. "Do you think that's why she left?" the waitress asked quietly. "Because of the fight?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted. "Maybe. Or maybe she just needed to escape. Either way, I should have reached out sooner. I should have tried harder to understand her instead of judging her choices." They spent hours going through photos and mementos, piecing together fragments of Victoria's life before her disappearance. Eleanor shared stories about her daughter's childhood, how she used to sing at the top of her lungs, how she loved painting murals on her bedroom walls, how she dreamed of becoming a musician despite her mother's reservations. The waitress listened intently, soaking in every detail. For the first time, she began to see her mother not just as her protector, but as a whole person with hopes, fears, and flaws. As they dug deeper, they discovered clues about Victoria's life after leaving home. With George's help, Eleanor tracked down old acquaintances and colleagues who had known her daughter in California, where she had moved to pursue a career in music. Slowly, a clearer picture emerged. Victoria had fallen in love with a struggling artist, and together, they built a modest life filled with creativity and passion. Then came the waitress, their daughter. But tragedy struck when Victoria died in a car accident shortly after giving birth. Her partner, overwhelmed by grief and unable to raise a child alone, entrusted the baby to Victoria's former housekeeper, the same woman who had briefly worked for Eleanor's household years earlier. The revelation hit the waitress like a tidal wave. Her mother hadn't abandoned her, not intentionally anyway. She had died far too young, leaving behind a legacy of love carried unknowingly by the locket. Tears streamed down her face as she processed the weight of it all. "She must have loved me so much," she whispered, "even though I never got to meet her." Eleanor wrapped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "She did," she said firmly. "And she would be so proud of the person you've become." Over the next few weeks, their bond deepened. Eleanor introduced the waitress to the world she had inherited, a world of privilege, responsibility, and endless opportunities. At first, the transition was overwhelming. The waitress struggled to adjust to the lavish lifestyle, feeling out of place among designer clothes and chauffeur-driven cars. But Eleanor reassured her every step of the way. "This isn't about changing who you are," she said. "It's about expanding your horizons. You deserve to dream bigger, to live fully." Together, they began to heal old wounds, not just for themselves, but for Victoria. They decided to honor her memory by creating something meaningful. Inspired by Victoria's love for music and art, they launched a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers and aspiring artists. It became their shared mission, a way to channel their grief into purpose. But not everyone welcomed their newfound relationship. Some of Eleanor's business associates resented the sudden appearance of an heir, fearing it might disrupt their own ambitions. One ambitious board member even spread rumors questioning the waitress's legitimacy, hoping to undermine her credibility. Yet Eleanor stood firm, defending her granddaughter fiercely. "Anyone who doubts her loyalty doesn't truly know her," she declared publicly, "and anyone who stands against her will answer to me." Through it all, the waitress remained resilient. Though the media circus surrounding her story made her uneasy, she refused to let negativity define her. Instead, she focused on building bridges, with Eleanor, with her late mother's memory, and with the community she aimed to serve. By the time they unveiled the foundation at a grand gala, the waitress had transformed. She walked onto the stage, with confidence, wearing the restored locket proudly around her neck. As she delivered a heartfelt speech, thanking Eleanor for giving her a second chance at family, the crowd erupted in applause. For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged. And Eleanor? Watching her granddaughter shine, she finally allowed herself to feel at peace. After decades of searching, she had found what she had been missing all along: a connection, a purpose, and most importantly, love. As weeks turned into months, the bond between Eleanor and her granddaughter grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of tension, misunderstandings, and raw emotions, but they faced them together, determined to build something real out of the fragments of their shared past. For Eleanor, it was a chance to rewrite her legacy, to turn years of regret into something meaningful. For the waitress, it was an opportunity to discover who she truly was, to piece together the puzzle of her identity and find her place in the world. One afternoon, as they sat in Eleanor's sprawling garden sipping tea, the waitress brought up a topic that had been weighing on her mind. "Do you think I'll ever meet my dad?" she asked hesitantly. Her voice was soft, almost tentative, as if she feared the answer might hurt more than help. Eleanor set her teacup down and sighed deeply. She had known this question would come eventually, but it didn't make it any easier to address. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "We've tried reaching out through some old contacts, but so far we haven't had much luck." He disappeared shortly after Victoria passed away, overwhelmed by grief, I imagine. But if he's still out, there we'll find him. The waitress nodded slowly, staring at the locket hanging around her neck. "It's strange, isn't it? To think about someone who was part of your life before you even existed. And yet, you don't know anything about them." "It is," Eleanor agreed. "But sometimes people need time to heal. Maybe he thought staying away was the best thing for everyone involved. Or maybe life just got in the way." Despite the uncertainty, the waitress felt a flicker of hope. Knowing her mother's story had already changed so much for her, it gave her a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. If finding her father meant completing another piece of the puzzle, then she was willing to wait. In the meantime, the foundation they had created in Victoria's honor began gaining momentum. Word spread quickly about its mission to support single mothers and aspiring artists, drawing attention from both local communities and national media outlets. The waitress threw herself into the work with enthusiasm, organizing events, meeting beneficiaries, and sharing her own story to inspire others. It became her anchor, a way to channel her pain into purpose and honor her mother's memory. Eleanor watched proudly as her granddaughter blossomed under the spotlight. Gone was the shy, uncertain girl who had first walked into the cafe all those months ago. In her place stood a confident young woman who commanded respect without demanding it, whose kindness and authenticity shone brighter than any title or inheritance ever could. But not everyone applauded their efforts. Behind closed doors, whispers of dissent began to surface. Some of Eleanor's business associates resented the sudden shift in focus, fearing that the foundation would divert resources and attention away from their profit-driven ventures. One particularly ambitious board member, a man named Roger, was especially vocal in his disapproval. He openly questioned the waitress's intentions, suggesting she was using her newfound status for personal gain rather than genuine altruism. At first, Eleanor tried to ignore the criticism, dismissing it as jealousy or misplaced priorities. But when Roger took his grievances public, accusing the waitress of exploiting Eleanor's wealth and influence, things escalated quickly. Tabloids ran sensational headlines, painting her as a gold-digging opportunist. Social media buzzed with speculation, and strangers weighed in with opinions that ranged from supportive to cruel. The waitress was devastated. She had expected challenges, but nothing like this. Sitting in her room late one night scrolling through hateful comments online, she felt tears streaming down her face. How could people judge her so harshly when they didn't even know her? Why did every step forward seem to come with a barrage of obstacles? When Eleanor found her like that, curled up on the bed clutching her phone, her heart broke all over again. She sat beside her granddaughter and gently pried the device from her hands. "You can't let them win," she said firmly. "People will always find something to criticize no matter what you do. But the only opinion that matters is yours, and mine. And I believe in you completely." The waitress looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "What if they're right? What if I'm not cut out for this?" "You are," Eleanor insisted, placing a hand over hers. "Look at everything you've accomplished already. You've taken a broken family and started putting it back together. You've honored your mother's memory in ways she would be proud of. Don't let anyone take that away from you." With Eleanor's encouragement, the waitress decided to confront the negativity head-on. Instead of hiding from the press or retreating into silence, she held a live interview on social media, speaking directly to her critics. She shared her journey, the struggles, the discoveries, the doubts, and explained why the foundation meant so much to her. "This isn't about money or fame," she said earnestly. "It's about making sure no one feels as lost as I once did. That's what my mom would have wanted, and that's what I'm going to keep fighting for." Her honesty resonated with viewers, and the tide began to turn. Supporters rallied around her, flooding social media with messages of encouragement and solidarity. Even some of Eleanor's skeptical colleagues softened their stance, impressed by her courage and conviction. Amidst the chaos, there was also a glimmer of hope regarding her father. Through persistent research, George uncovered a lead, a man matching his description living in a small coastal town several states away. When the waitress heard the news, her heart raced with equal parts excitement and fear. What if he didn't want to see her? What if he blamed her for Victoria's death, however unfairly? Eleanor sensed her apprehension and offered to accompany her on the trip. "You don't have to go alone," she said reassuringly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The drive to the coastal town was long and quiet, both women lost in their thoughts. When they finally arrived, they found a modest home overlooking the ocean, weathered by time but filled with character. As they knocked on the door, the waitress clutched Eleanor's hand tightly, bracing herself for whatever came next. When the door opened, a man appeared, older now, with graying hair and lines etched into his face, but unmistakably familiar. His eyes widened in shock as he took in the sight of them. For a moment, no one spoke. Then softly he whispered, "Victoria?" The waitress shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No," she said. "I'm her daughter." Time seemed to stand still as the man processed her words. Slowly, recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by a flood of emotion. He stepped forward, pulling her into a tight embrace. "My God," he murmured, "all these years. I thought I'd lost you forever." For the waitress, it was a moment of pure catharsis, a reunion she hadn't dared to dream of. And for Eleanor, watching the two of them connect, it was proof that healing was possible, even after decades of loss and longing. As they sat together in the cozy living room, sharing stories and laughter, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their fractured family was far from perfect, but it was whole again. and that, she realized, was worth more than anything else. The months that followed the emotional reunion with her father were transformative for everyone involved. For the waitress, it was a time of rediscovery, not just of her roots, but of herself. Meeting her dad had filled in another crucial piece of the puzzle, giving her a fuller picture of who she was and where she came from. He wasn't perfect. Years of grief and isolation had left their mark on him. But he was honest about his mistakes, and his love for Victoria, and now for his daughter, was undeniable. Together they began to rebuild what had been broken, one conversation at a time. Eleanor watched this new chapter unfold with a mix of awe and gratitude. Seeing her granddaughter connect with the man who had once loved Victoria so deeply brought a sense of closure she hadn't thought possible. It also reminded her of how much she still had to learn about forgiveness, not just toward others, but toward herself. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape the future. And that's exactly what she intended to do. The launch of the foundation was set for a gala unlike any Eleanor had ever hosted before. The event wasn't just about raising funds, it was about celebrating resilience, creativity, and second chances. Held in a grand ballroom adorned with twinkling lights and vibrant floral arrangements, the evening was designed to honor Victoria's memory while looking ahead to brighter days. Invitations went out to friends, family, beneficiaries of the foundation, and even some of Eleanor's former critics, including Roger, though he declined to attend. On the night of the gala, the ballroom buzzed with energy. Guests mingled beneath crystal chandeliers, sipping champagne and marveling at displays showcasing the foundation's impact. Artwork created by single mothers, testimonials from struggling artists who had found support, and photographs capturing moments of hope and transformation. At the center of it all stood Eleanor and her granddaughter side by side, radiating quiet strength. When it was time for speeches, Eleanor took the stage first. Clutching the microphone, she spoke candidly about her journey, the regrets, the heartache, and the unexpected joy of finding her granddaughter. "For years I carried the weight of my mistakes," she admitted, her voice steady, despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "I let pride and fear drive a wedge between me and the people I loved most. But life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. This foundation is my way of saying sorry. To my daughter, to my granddaughter, and to anyone else I may have hurt along the way. It's also my way of saying thank you for giving me a second chance." The room erupted into applause as Eleanor stepped back, gesturing for her granddaughter to take the stage. Dressed in a simple yet elegant gown, the locket gleaming around her neck, the young woman walked forward with confidence. She scanned the crowd, her gaze lingering briefly on her father, who sat beaming with pride, and then on Eleanor, whose presence had become a steady anchor in her life. "Tonight is about more than just honoring my mom's memory," she began, her voice clear and strong. "It's about proving that even in our darkest moments there's always light waiting to break through. When I first learned the truth about my family, I felt lost, like everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down. But thanks to Eleanor, my dad, and so many others who supported me, I realized something important. Belonging isn't about where you come from. It's about the connections you make and the love you share." Her words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the audience. As she concluded her speech, she held up the restored locket for everyone to see. "This pendant represents loss, yes, but it also represents hope. Hope that we can heal old wounds, bridge divides, and create something beautiful out of broken pieces. That's what this foundation is all about." The room erupted into cheers, the sound echoing off the walls like a tidal wave of affirmation. For Eleanor and her granddaughter, it was a moment of triumph, a testament to how far they'd come since that fateful day in the cafe. In the weeks and months that followed, the foundation continued to grow, touching lives across the country. Single mothers received grants to start businesses, aspiring artists gained access to resources and mentorship, and communities rallied around causes that mattered. The waitress threw herself into the work wholeheartedly, traveling to events, meeting beneficiaries, and ensuring that every dollar raised made a difference. Along the way, she discovered talents she never knew she had, public speaking, leadership, and an uncanny ability to inspire others. Eleanor, too, embraced her role as a guiding force within the foundation. Though she had always been generous with her wealth, she now understood the true power of philanthropy. It wasn't just about writing checks. It was about creating opportunities for people to thrive. Together, she and her granddaughter became a formidable team, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. But perhaps the most profound change was within themselves. Eleanor, once consumed by regret, found peace in knowing she had done everything she could to make amends. The waitress, who had spent years feeling like an outsider, finally felt like she belonged, not just to a family, but to something bigger than herself. Even her father, hesitant at first, began opening up, reconnecting with parts of his life he had long abandoned. One crisp autumn afternoon, Eleanor and her granddaughter returned to the cafe where it all began. Sitting at the same corner table by the window, they ordered 2 cups of Earl Grey tea and reminisced about the journey that had brought them here. The waitress smiled softly as she looked around the cozy space. "It's funny, isn't it? How one little locket changed everything." "It wasn't just the locket," Eleanor replied, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. "It was you. You had the courage to face the truth no matter how hard it was. That's what made all the difference." As they clinked their teacups together in a silent toast, the sun streamed through the windows, casting golden light over the room. Outside, the city bustled with its usual chaos, but inside there was only warmth and connection, a reminder that sometimes the smallest moments hold the greatest power to transform lives.